Hello and welcome to TheFederal. You're watching Off the Beaten Track. This is a program in which we take a 360-degree view of something, of an issue. The Indian general elections, the Lok Sabha elections, and a few assembly elections have just got over. It has been a very dramatic verdict because, against all expectations and against all odds, if I may add, the Bharatiya Janata Party, which has been ruling for the last 10 years under Mr. Narendra Modi as Prime Minister, has not been able to secure a majority. So, is bar coalition sarkar. That is the slogan for the next 5 years. This time, a coalition government once again. In a way that a coalition government is always enables citizens to breathe easily. It is also going to be happening now. In the last 10 years, we all know that there was a huge assault on Indian democracy. Institutions were hollowed out, democratic traditions, practices, and conventions were not followed. Parliamentary functioning became a sham, and a lot of other things started happening. Civil society and the media, whoever wanted to play a very honorable part as the profession expects them to, all that came under attack. Anybody who questioned the government was labeled an anti-national. Government actually became synonymous with the country. Now, amid all this, when there appeared to be all kinds of hopelessness around, yet there were some instances where it appeared that there was hope, that people were still not willing to accept all that what the government was wanting them to do. We will be talking today about the elections. We will be talking about this flicker of hope which has never been extinguished in India, even during the dark days of the internal emergency during Indira Gandhi, also through the last 5 years, especially after 2019, when things became very bad, when many people said that we had an emergency situation without proclamation. I will be speaking to Professor Indrajit Roy, who is a political scientist. He's a professor at the University of York. And most importantly, who has written this very fine book called Audacious Hope. And this has been written before the election. In a way, then we can say that it actually came before the election results, anticipating and reading reasons for hope in India. So, Professor Indrajit Roy, welcome to our program and thank you for giving us time. I would like to understand from you that where did you see hope, first of all, during a time when it appeared that breathing was very difficult in Modi's India. Let's begin on this note. Then we will come about that how this current verdict further strengthens hope in the country.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on this program, and hello to all your listeners and viewers. I'm extremely pleased that you start with this question, Nilanjan, if I may.
Sure.
Where does one look at hope amid such despairing, almost desperate times? And I have to say, from the moment the Modi Sarkar took office back in 2014, there were lots of people who had started worrying about what was to follow. And each one of them had also said, I remember talking to people in rural Bihar, where I was doing fieldwork at that time, in urban Delhi, where I lived at that time, and where I met a lot of people. They were worried about what was to come, but they were also preparing to meet what was to come.
Okay.
And some activists I respect very much, as the days, as the years went by, and the full force of, what they had feared was coming into being. And I would talk to them and ask them, why do you not, how come you're not giving up? Because as you mentioned, so many sectors of our society were just giving up. The media was crumbling, institutions were sort of capitulating. But many of these activists I saw, they were sort of keeping up the good fight. They were protesting, they were, calling out the government. And I remember asking them, well, why are you doing this? Isn't it easier if you just gave up? And they said, no, how can we give up? Despair is blasphemy. I remember somebody quoting a friend. Um, and that really got me to think about the ways in which people cope with difficulties, the ways in which people think about how life can be made better, more livable during extremely difficult times. I think matters came to a head after 2019 when the government was re-elected. And if you remember, within the first few months, they passed a
Right.
series of legislations, including the Citizenship Amendment Act, which was passed in December that year.
Right.
And of course, it was passed with a brutal parliamentary majority. There were hours of discussion, but really there was no opposition within the parliament in terms of the numbers. I mean, of course, people spoke very spiritedly, but in terms of numbers, there was really no opposition. And I remember at that point on that day thinking, well, now we've entered a very different world. We are going to become an almost a theocracy. I've written about how India has become an ethnocracy. And I'm glad that that has not, lasted too long, or there are green shoots. But what really surprised me was the way in which people poured out on the streets in the winter of 2019 to protest
Right.
this kind of an divisive law. Of course, there were people, many Muslims who feared quite rightly that they would be directly affected. But I thought what was interesting was the way in which many Hindus also came out of the streets. Many children of refugees from Punjab and Bengal, the two partition provinces in whose name this law was sort of being, pushed, and who said that we are refugees, don't do this in our name, and that sort of really got me thinking about how there were still sort of sparks of hope among people who were not going to capitulate, who were not going to sort of, bow down. I have to also say, all of this was preceded by the 2016, student protests,
Right.
both against Rohit Vemula's institutional murder, as well as, sparked by the events in JNU.
Right.
And at that time, also, I had sort of seen this, this sparkle of hope, so lots of sparkle of hopes. But then it seemed to die down after a while. And then it got picked up again in 2019, 2020, when a lot of the protagonists of those movements just sort of made a comeback. So I think there were these glimmers that I think just sort of, joined together almost like a torch of hope. There were lots of sparks all over, and then they sort of got together in terms of, giving us a torch of hope. So I think it was these two events really that got me thinking about the significance of hope, by sectors, by actors in society who you would have thought, well, the government will easily crush them. Uh, but of course, the state has enormous institutional power that didn't stop people from, pushing against this kind of display of power. In my own academic work, I look at how power is exercised, but also how power is constantly challenged. Not necessarily through revolutionary struggles, but through everyday acts of
Right.
negotiation, undermining, poking fun at those who are in power, so that hegemony is never
That's
total.
right.
Hegemony is never total, and I thought the last decade showed us that. So in a nutshell, that's my response to the question of how hope and where one sort of sees hope. um, Hope is not delusional, so a lot of these individuals who were doing things did not fool themselves that they would bring about change immediately.
Mm.
So they were very realistic about the forces they were up against. And I thought that really sort of got me thinking about how they were thinking about hope, and how
Right.
they were making a very calculated, they were making lots of calculations about what would work, what wouldn't work, and had no illusions that they would succeed immediately. And I
Right.
thought that was great. That was really the sum and substance of hope.
Now, I have a question. I'm trying to understand that. Say, in a parliamentary democracy, real change, to something with which the people are disagreeing, happens essentially only through elections. You can, at best, you have an issue, you can protest, and you can actually force the government to take back its decision, as it happened most famously in the last 5 years with the farm bills, which eventually, because of the relentlessness of the protest movement by the farmers, right in the middle of the COVID years, the government had to finally backtrack and withdraw the farm bills. The occasions which, when it happens during the elections, of course, the 2024 elections, there has not been change, yet there has been a change.
Yes. Yeah.
We no longer have a Modi government in power. If there is a situation that Narendra Modi eventually takes oath as Prime Minister once again, till the time he doesn't, because this is a democracy and we must be prepared for any kind of development and
Ab-
uncertainty.
Absolutely. Mm.
Till once and if he assumes the prime minister's position, this is going to be an NDA government. That, I think, is a big change.
Yeah.
Even as you were speaking about the NDA, the first thought which came to my mind, that if this is going to be an NDA, can those who continue to remain in jail on because the state has alleged that they were involved in sparking an actual act of rioting during the Delhi communal riots of February March 2020, are they going to find any relief in the courts and be released or not? Would other cases also, which have been falsely filed on a large number of people, under the UAPA, which is the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, where they continue to be in jail for fairly long periods of time, are they going to, those cases, will they be reviewed, and then whether the charges will be withdrawn, or at least some kind of relief would be given to them? So these questions come. This is not the first time that there has been change through a verdict. Most recently, it happened in 2004. 2014, of course, was also a change because the UPA was voted out and Narendra Modi led BJP was handed over a majority of its own. Mr. Vajpayee's NDA government was voted out in 2004. But possibly the most famous, you know, time when the government was actually voted out was 1977, where not only did the Congress lose majority in parliament, but even the prime minister was defeated in her own constituency. Indira Gandhi lost from Raebareli. Would you say that 2024 is somehow comparable with some of the most important elections where there has been, the electorate has actually precipitated a regime change? Is it in any way comparable, given the fact that after 2014 and 2019, Not only has the BJP not got a majority, its vote share has reduced, marginally maybe, but still it is reduced. And even the Prime Minister has won with the lowest margin since 2014. From a margin of something around 4.5 lakh votes, it has been cut down to about 1.5 lakh votes. So, would you say that the extent of this mandate actually can be compared to some of the previous ones?
Thank you. I think that's a very thoughtful question because, especially because of the way you situate it historically. I
Right.
think it's easy to overlook the significance of this moment and say, what's the point? They've come back to power and that sort of thing. Although all the points you mentioned about the next 2 weeks being crucial hold, of course. Um, I would say that yes, this mandate and this election is comparable to the previous, events that you mentioned, instances that you mentioned, 2004 as well as 1977 and potentially 2014 as well. And the reason is this, and let's put this very clearly, and your own work has shown us this. Um, the BJP has been stripped of its parliamentary majority. In 2014, the BJP came to power on its own. Of course, it had an alliance, and the BJP,
Right.
to give it credit, has always been very sort of, it has the BJP, not the present prime minister, but the BJP has always sort of made a big deal about carrying its allies together.
Right.
But the BJP in 2014, by in and of itself, got a parliamentary majority. That majority increased in 2019, but in these elections, we see the BJP losing its parliamentary majority. I think that is significant. It is even more significant given what we know about how uneven the playing field was. You mentioned in the beginning the role of the media, you mentioned in the beginning the role of the institutions, including the Honorable Election Commission. We know what the opposition parties were up against. And for the BJP to be sort of to be stripped of its parliamentary majority, despite wielding all the institutional prowess that it had, despite and I suppose because of the kind of vitriolic narrative that the prime minister had to resort to, the fact that the BJP doesn't enjoy that sort of supreme position in parliament, I think in itself makes this election comparable to others. The opposition was up against all sorts of odds, not least its own internal dissensions, but the way in which they were able to get their act together, even if it was uneven, even if it was not, as early as it should have been, they were able to mount what you could call a satisfactory challenge to the government, to the ruling party. And I think a key difference, of course, now is that together they have, pushed the BJP in a situation where it is reliant on what the allies would want to do or not. They have to reach out to allies, and they're already doing that. And I think in your own program, you told us, I think your interview with Karan and others, you have also said how the present prime minister isn't quite the sort of coalition guy that
Right.
is needed for this kind of a situation. And I think what we are seeing is therefore a situation where the government has a very fragile majority, and that significantly clips its powers as well as the powers of the prime minister. What we saw in the last decade was, a totalitarianizing tendency, where the prime minister was sort of, trying to become more and more authoritarian. And there were enough checks, I suppose, within the BJP, within the RSS, that would sort of hold him in place, or tried to hold him in place, but didn't always succeed. I think now those who want to check the powers of the prime minister within the BJP have had a stronger hand. So yes, we haven't seen a change of guard, But we have seen a change in the circumstances under which the government will have to rule. They cannot take the legislative majorities for granted. And so
Right.
contentious legislation of the sort that we saw earlier, whether it's the Citizenship Amendment Act, whether it's the Farmers' Laws, certainly we are already seeing Uniform Civil Code, is likely to be put on, is likely to come under discussion. The allies have been demanding a review of the Agniveer scheme. So, you're going to see many institutional pushbacks, slowdowns, in the way in which the government would like to push through unpopular and potentially divisive laws. I think the most interesting aspect would be, and this is something I'd really like to look out for, is, before the elections, the Home Minister assured his listeners that the CAA and the NRC would sort of get going, get cracking as soon as the government comes to
That's
power.
right.
Um, and it'll be interesting to see how that pans out, because my own view is, for what it's worth, that the opposition is a much stronger, more confident opposition in Parliament, and the allies themselves may well be in a position the BJP's allies may be in a position to tell Mr. Modi or whoever becomes the prime minister, hey, slow down, there are other things to do. Don't sort of jump get too ahead of yourself. I think you already see some of this change in the language in the meetings that the prime minister has been addressing, where
Right.
he's had to talk about how the NDA works together, and he's referring to everyone as sathis, and we'll see how long that lasts. But the point is, it's Mr. Modi, if he comes to power and if he's able to pull through the next 2 weeks and form the government and sort of prove his his majority in the parliament, will have no option but to take on board those of his allies and what they feel. And the allies are in a position to force change because of the numbers that they hold. Now, of course, the allies themselves, as you know, both Mr. Nitish Kumar and Mr. Naidu have a track record of
Switching sides.
switching sides, exactly. And that could work for the government. It could work against the government as well. So
Right.
I think what we can be in for is a lot of uncertainty, and some of that could be productive uncertainty. If you see what I mean, it'll be democratic uncertainty.
Right.
Democracy is about uncertainties. Hope is disappointable. There's always the possibility that what you hope for doesn't
Right.
come through, which is why it's hope and not utopia. It's not a given answer, right?
Right.
And the same thing with democracy. Democracy is inherently unstable, uncertain, and that's what makes it so exciting. And that's what makes democratic politics so exciting.
Right.
So I think that's where I would say I think this election is at par with 2004 and 1977, even if it didn't change the guard. But the circumstances under which it was run, the uneven playing
Okay.
field that the opposition had, which they were able to overcome to strip the BJP of its parliamentary majority. I think this is really, really important to bear in mind. The BJP isn't the single largest power anymore. And I think that's significant. I would think of the 1989 elections
Right.
as a sort of counterpoint, because we don't often think about 1989 when we talk about big change, but we know
But it
that
was a
India
big change because
exactly.
that was the government with the largest majority ever.
Yes,
It was
yes,
elected in 1984, 400 and
plus
6 votes,
yes,
right in the beginning, and then after including those from Assam and Punjab, there were almost about 415 seats in Lok Sabha. It was actually
exactly.
extraordinary, never before, not even by Indira Gandhi or Jawaharlal Nehru prior to that.
Absolutely.
If we actually look at the history of coalition governments in India, let's leave out the earlier coalitions in Kerala in the 1950s, which were very
Hmm.
unceremoniously dismissed by the Nehru government at that time. It was a CPI-led government at that time. There was a
Yeah.
United Communist Party of India. The CPM had not been formed. If we leave that out, 1967. Nobody knew how to work with one another, how to run coalitions, and they just kind of crumbled in a heap within a matter of months. 1977, at an all India level, the first ever time when a non-Congress prime minister is elected, they did not really able to work on issues. There would be counter statements all the time. The process of decision making was not clear to anybody, and then eventually they parted ways because of the ostensible reason of the links of one section of the party with the RSS, that is the Bharatiya Jansangh,
Yeah.
their links with the RSS, given the name of dual membership issue. 1989, a coalition government came which did not have a majority. It was not the largest party in parliament. The largest party at the time was the Congress, which was in opposition to it. And, it was propped up by a very smaller constituent, the BJP from one side and the left from the other side. Ideologically adversarial parties propping up a slightly more centrist political party. 89, also 1990, when Chandrasekhar became the prime minister. Also, it did not last, lasted barely for a few months. From the month of November it started, and by March elections had been called for. 96, Mr. Vajpayee forms a 13-day government, does not last. United Front government, a coalition is formed, propped up by the Congress, from the second largest party from outside. The largest party, that is the Bharatiya Janata Party, then comes in opposition, and you have a very small party, which is actually a coalition. They come together to form the government. Yet governance does not suffer.
No. Mm.
Called Dream Budget of India was presented in 1997 when the base of taxation was widened. Called the Dream Budget was presented by Mr. P. Chidambaram in 1997. But even then, that did not last the full term. It kind of collapsed. 98 also did not last. The Vajpayee government, 13 months. It is in 1999 that the consensus was reached between various constituent parties of a coalition on how to run coalitions. That is what was also continued through the UPA years. Now, would you, as a political scientist, list out what should be the principles of running a coalition and what you would expect to happen, or what will be the clues that you will get that this coalition is not going very well, that it is not likely to last its entire tenure? And
Yeah.
what do we need to look at?
Yeah, I think that's a good one, because you're right that lots. I think people have gotten out of the habit of coalitions in the last 10 years,
Right.
and so I think there'll be some amount of recalibration that will need to be done on both sides, on the side of the government as well as on the side of the opposition, if they are to keep their coalition together. But let's stick to the government at the moment, and let's stick to what would be a good sort of indicator. I think we've already seen that the BJP has its own sort of set of policies which it wants to push through. We haven't seen a common program across the NDA,
Right.
because the election campaign was all about Modi's guarantee, Modi's this, Modi's that. It was always Modi ki guarantee.
Right.
We didn't quite see an NDA ki guarantee.
Right.
We didn't quite see, and of course, I mean, they can now say that they were all together and all the NDA partners together, and the NDA partners are, being polite and saying all the right things that, as they should, about, somebody, saying that they would like Mr. Modi to remain prime minister. But I'm not holding my horses, because, it really is, the next 2 weeks really sort of is crucial, because hopefully the prime minister will have to prove on the floor of parliament that he has indeed the confidence, the majority. He enjoys the confidence of the majority, and then we'll see what happens. So I think the absence of a common program itself is, to me, a big sort of flag red flag in terms of the fact that this coalition would be very arbitrary and there would be lots of, giving and taking that will keep happening. So, I think.
Let me remind you and the viewers at this point that in 1998, when Mr. Vajpayee formed the first coalition government, which lasted, 13 months till the no confidence motion, was voted in with just one single majority, and Mr. Vajpayee had to resign.
Yes.
The common minimum program, a national agenda of governance, that was the name of the document, which was actually released by the NDA. NDA, mind you, was also formed only at that time in 1998. March 1998 is the time that the NDA actually comes to exist. When these parties get together and they immediately release a national agenda of governance. The UPA government also had a common minimum program. So I guess that there will be pressure on the NDA, the new NDA, to not only have that but also have a new convener. This government, the BJP did not take the initiative to appoint a convener of the NDA after 2018 when Mr. Chandrababu Naidu quit the NDA.
And of course, it's interesting that it's, Mr. Nitish Kumar, who's a key ally now, is the one who had convened the India coalition to start with.
That's right.
He sort of gave that idea. So I think you're right. The absence of a common minimum document, the absence of a convener are already signals that, things will be rocky. They'll be rocky. I suppose what I'll be looking out for is pronouncements by different leaders and different, leaders of different political parties on key issues. Of course, we don't even know what those key issues will be, because if the elections were anything to go by, and if the
Right.
BJP's own sort of agenda, what they were talking about was anything to go by, all we heard was Hindu Muslim and Mangal Sutra and
Mutton
Mughals
Mughal.
and Mughals, exactly. So we don't even know in that sense, what
I had
they
I had
would.
written an article, where listing out the various words which started with the alphabet M.
Yes, yes.
One of the readers pointed out that you forgot the biggest M, that is Modi.
Modi himself. Yes, yes. And remember,
No,
these are people who are, who've been in Indian politics for decades before, Mr. Modi sort of came to, grab the limelight in 2014.
I
So
have a very specific question. It became almost, nobody ever questioned that in the last 10 years, the government, despite being a coalition government on paper, pursued and implemented various Hindutva related promises of the BJP.
yeah,
It
yeah,
was just considered that this is going to happen because the BJP has a majority of its
yes,
own, and
yes,
very unfortunately, the coalition partners kept absolutely quiet.
yes,
In fact,
yes.
the main grouse from the coalition partners used to be that their opinion is not sought.
Never sought.
Do you
Yes.
think that this will change? And if it doesn't change, the future of this government, the survival of this government or the stability of this government is really going to be in doubt?
As I said, it's the pronouncements that I'd be looking out for, because we don't
Right.
have a document yet. So, we can't sort of make a sort of, we can't sort of base our understanding on a common
Right.
minimum program. But it's the pronouncements. And I think that's where what you're saying will become crucial. If the government sort of pushes its policies in the name of the NDA coalition, and then the coalition partners say, hey, hold on, you never really consulted with us, that's an
Hmm.
obvious sort of sign that things are cracking or have already cracked or were never sort of brought together. If you hear contradictory pronouncements from the different coalition partners, then obviously that's another sign that things are not all well, and the BJP may well press some of its more seasoned folks into action to win over the coalition partners. But I think the allies have smelt blood, in the sense they know that
Right.
they can force certain agendas, or at least they can prevent certain agendas from coming up. I mean, what's really interesting for me to see is, as I mentioned, the CAA is obviously one interesting area I'd like to look out. I'd like to see what happens. Although before the CAA, I'd like very much to know who the Home Minister is going to be in the
Right.
new sort of establishment. I would even
Do you
say,
think that will give you a very clear indication about what kind of policies this government is going to pursue?
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. To come back to a point you made earlier, I'm not so sure about the release of political prisoners just yet. And
Right.
that's where I'm going to temper my hopes and not sort of go all
Okay.
radical. But I do think the choice of the Home Minister would be would be for me the starting at the very start. That'll be an important
Right.
indication of convergence or divergence. I mean, I wouldn't even be surprised, to be honest, if the prime ministerial candidate is under question or
Right.
is doubted. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, the last week has thrown up surprises. The next 2 weeks, could well sort of be full of even more surprises. Because, of course, the NDA, the BJP would like to form the government, right?
Right.
And as a party, given that they have the backing of the RSS, they have a backing of lots of other social actors, they may well be willing to sacrifice, one or two people, if that means that they can keep the government together. They're an ideological party in a sense that
Right.
they are in the service of an ideology. And you and I may or may not sympathize with that ideology, but we have to understand the fact that they are in the service of an ideology. And it may well be considered worth sacrificing one or two individuals for the sake of the ideology.
Right.
So I wouldn't sort of put that out of the table.
Right.
But does that necessarily mean that things will suddenly change on the ground for Muslims? Will it mean that political prisoners will be released? Of course not. These
We-
it'll take time, especially the question of political prisoners. There's a lot of public opinion that has been built, that has been polarized, that has been vehemently against liberal values, and I think that's going to
Right.
take time to sort of be
To roll back,
roll
so
back. Exactly,
yes.
exactly.
Yes.
But I would look out for pronouncements. I would look out for ministerial appointments,
Right.
really. And if even if the TDP bags the position of the speaker, which is what it is understood that they are going for,
Yes. That is what the media has reported.
that's given the role of the speaker in the last parliament, and given how important the speaker
The
is,
last two houses, in fact,
the last two
been
houses.
completely an ally of the presiding officer, has virtually you know been an ally of the ruling party.
Absolutely. And I mean, that reminds me, if you will probably have, remember when the farmers' bills were passed, it
Right.
was a voice vote, right? And who decided what the voice was? It was not the opposition leader, it was not the prime minister, it was the speaker. So I think it's an enormously powerful position. And if they're able to get that, I would say, well, that's one way in which the
That's
allies have sort of taken over, not taken
right.
over, but they have been able to push
They
the
have been
agenda.
able to actually make a
Now,
change, and make a dent.
let me be clear. Not, and I want to reiterate, none of this means that overnight you're going to have a liberal utopia in the country. That's not the way
Right.
these things work, because this is a matter of negotiation. This is a matter of social sort of conversations, which will take a while. And the poison is so sort of all around us that it'll take a while to roll back. But there's always, there's light at
Yes.
the end of the tunnel. There are, rays of the sun through the clouds, as it were. And I think we should not miss the enormous opportunity that this breach gives to those who really want a progressive India.
Right. Well, thank you, Professor Indrajit Roy,